So welcome everybody, welcome on this next video about weathering effects. Today we're going to create some grease and oil leaks from this first older heavy assault walker. So from the Revel kit. For this we're going to use different techniques. The first one is going to be adding some chipped effect of Engine Grime. This is going to be our base layer for the further effects. So we're going to chip this using the hairspray technique. And then we're going to use the fresh engine oil. And finally we'll use some dark earth pigments. So and of course I forgot to mention that we're also going to use some oil paints. This is an artist oil paint. This is the sepia color. And it's going to be very useful for us to give some depth to the whole model. So let's go. We are going first to airbrush some Engine Grime with some enamel odorless thinner. It's very easy to do actually, and the technique is a bit different from what we're used to do, because generally we chip the paint, the acrylic paint, but this time we're going to use this Engine Grime. It's an enamel product, so you'll see it's quite easy to do, and let's go. So I need my airbrush for this. I'm going to pour some thinner in this. So prior to actually applying the enamel color on the model, I applied two very light coats of hairspray. I generally use the scratches effect, but here I wanted to be very fast, so I used some hairsprays in a can. It was very fast actually. I just sprayed the product going like, and that's it. And then I barely touched the button to get some spits of hairspray. This is very useful because it's going to create, maybe if I do it well, it's going to create some very interesting effects. So let's go with the Engine Grime. So I'm going to pour some in the airbrush. So what I'm going to do is first apply a very light coat, so that to break the surface tension, and then I'll dry this, and then I'll move on adding more depth, adding more effects on this part. So let's go. This is too runny, so I need to add more product. That should be better. So my first coat is ready. I'm going to dry this, and I'll come back later. Okay, so my very first light coat is dry, so now I can move on. Drying time again. Okay, so now the part is dry. So what we're going to do is apply some chips on this. So I'm going to use some water in this cup and a round brush. It's a 4 brush, it's a very large brush. I'm not going to touch this with my fingers right now because I'm going to make a whole mess. But basically this is going to be, I'm going to add very light strokes of water. As usual, I always get some water on the brush and then remove most of it on my paper towel, and then I just humidify the surface. I'm going very slowly. I want to see how the water reacts with the engine grime, and the first effects are starting to show. So as the paint here is an enamel paint, the water will tend to create drops, small droplets, and these are going to go through the paint and dissolve the hairspray. These droplets are going to make very particular and unique patterns, which are just exactly what we are looking for as a base coat. I think it's quite okay. So the effect looks a bit rough. You see, it's not reacting really like a enamel paint or lacquer paint. We have very specific surfaces. Like here, we have some droplets. And it's quite interesting. So this is going to be our base work for this, and base layer for this, and so let's move on. I'm going to dry this first. Okay, so now the effect is dry, so we can move on, and now we're going to work with the oil paints. So I'm going to use only the sepia oil color. It's nearly dry. I prepped the palette yesterday, so it's quite old now, but still the paint is still workable. So this is good. And we're going to get our first base effects. So I'm going to add a bit of paint on the surface right here. I'm not being very careful right now because I know I'm going to blend this very roughly, and I'm going to use my old friend, my very worn out paint brush, and I'm going to blend this. So this first coat of sepia oil paint is just good for what we're doing. So I'm being very random right now. I'm just, you know, spreading and playing with the paint to get various effects. I'm not being very careful. It's just to get a very first effect. This area I'm working on is not really important, simply because it's not going to be visible once the model is built. This is clearly hidden, but you never know. Okay, and now we're going to blend this a bit. There we go. All right. Okay, I'm going to dry this. This looks good for the moment. I'm going to dry this and add another layer and maybe add some streaks. Okay, so let's move on. I'm being a bit more careful right now. I want to work the effect, but the problem is the enamel paint is not dry. The engine grime is not dry. So basically what happens now is that sometimes I tend to remove some of the product, but it's not a problem. We're going to get dirtier. Okay, now it's time to add some streaks. So I'm being also random here. I always try not to have regular streaks and streaks that look alike, that have the same shape or show the same pattern, same length. Basically, you have to be very careful with streaks because an over-streaked model looks terrible. It doesn't look realistic. Mostly and more particularly when the streaks have all the same width and the same patterns. Really, it doesn't look good at all. Okay. This is good. Like this. Okay, I'm going to dry this and then we'll move on. Okay. So now let's move on with the fun part. We're going to play with the pigments. And for this I used dark earth pigment from Ammo. Reason I don't use black pigments is because I still want the fresh engine oil to show through and to be visible and not to have an overly black effect. So I tried to find a dark pigment color, but I still want to have I still want to see the other effects. So let's take some pigments. Oops, here. And now we're going to add some sepia oil paint. So my mix is, I'm going to try to show the mix. So the mix is quite actually thick, as you can see. I'm trying to get a very dark color, which looks like grease. And why do I use pigments here? I use pigments because I want to have some texture to it. I want to have some grit, something to is going to show. Okay, this is looking good. So it's up to you to find the right texture. You have to make your own mixes and try to find what suits you best. Okay, so now we're going to try to show this on the surface. So I'm going to add first a first layer of pigments on the upper part. So we don't have any oil effect for the moment. We're going to add them as we move on, actually. Here I'm stippling the surface. I'm not dragging the pigments because I don't want to have large amounts of pigments, and I don't want to show streaks, places that would show pigments and others that won't. So I'm just stippling the pigments here on the surface. It's quite straightforward, and it's going to show really nice, some really nice texture. Well, I hope. Okay, This is good for now. We're going to dry this and we're going to add then another layer, but this time we're going to add some fresh engine oil. So as you can see, when I dried the surface, the pigments got black, matte again. So now I'm going to add some French engine oil in the mix just to get a shiny effect. So I'm adding some oil effects in my palette with my pigments. Like this. And now I'm going to add more effects. So again, I'm stippling the surface with my pigments, my mix of pigments, oil paints, and fresh engine oil. This is going to be still a bit matte when it dries, but it's going to be a bit more satin. But don't worry, then we'll finish the effect using pure oil effects. Okay, this is good. I'm going to dry this again. Okay, and what I can do is blur some rough edges, like this. I'm going to just make them a bit blurry so that the effects looks more realistic and not too okay. So now more engine oil. And let's go. Okay, now we're going to try to make some streaks. So I'm just thinning a bit my mix, and I'm going to remove some of the paint, and then we're going to go over the previous streaks, trying to get a convincing effect. Just like this. And then we can blend this a bit. Okay, this is quite good. This first streak is not very nice though. Here we go. That's a bit better. I still believe it's a bit too large and oversized, but maybe if I do it like this. Okay, and then I'm going to blur the bottom of this. That's it. Okay. This is a large streak, but I think it's okay. So, and now we're going to finish the effect using some pure oil, fresh engine oil. So I'm just taking some of the product on my brush, and then I'm just touching the surface here and there to add the effect, the pure effect. I want it to be shiny and greasy. really. Okay, and I can finish adding some streaks. Well, I did them all. Just with the tip of the brush, like that. Okay, and if it's too thick, like the last one I did, I can still come and thin it a bit in the bottom. Okay. Okay, I think this is good. It looks quite realistic. Apart from this here streak, which is a bit too large, I can try to blend this further, blending like this. But basically, this is the effect I was after, and I feel quite happy with this. We can finish the effect adding some speckles. So it's quite easy to do actually. We get some product and then use this tool. Make some tests on this. Here I'm going to add some thinner because it's not showing. This is a bit too. This is good. And then we can finish the effect adding some oil spots like this. Okay, now you have some glossy spots all over and the effect is finished to me. Thank you very much for watching. See you around, and do not hesitate leaving comments. Do not hesitate dropping a thumb up, and see you around.